Hello, and welcome to our webinar brought to you by IncentiFind. This webinar is the last in a series of webinars that we have been doing for the residential lending community on various sustainability topics that have ranged from energy efficiency, water efficiency, and as well as renewable energy projects. And these webinars have been designed to help provide you with some helpful information so you can become subject matter experts on these various sustainability topics so that you can then be comfortable to provide lending to go and deploy all these different types of projects. And this final subject in our webinar series is going to touch on resilience, and specifically then how IncentiFind sales products can be integrated into your loan sales cycle to help with deploying these projects. So before we go any further, I'll just introduce myself one final time. My name is Zuba, and again, I'm a strategic advisor on residential lending for IncentiFind, and where I've been with the organization now in this role for the last 2.5 years. And a quick nod to our founder and CEO, Natalie Campos-Goodman, who would be your primary contact on basically learning about IncentiFind's products and how basically they can be integrated to help get these different types of projects done to improve the sustainability of a residential property. So just as a quick summary of who we are as an organization. So IncentiFind is, again, the nation's best database for real estate incentives on, again, various different types of areas as we've gone through in these various webinars that we've been doing, which can then bring cost savings to new construction or existing building upgrades. In which case we've been doing this since 2017, since the year of our founding. It's based still in Houston, Texas, and we do serve all 50 states and as well as our neighbors to the north in Canada. And we're a team of 23 that continues to grow. And by evidence of that, you go to our website and you'll see our various and more spreading team that we're doing. And at the same time, we have a database that certainly is of 24,000 incentives and that continues to grow in those different programs that we can provide, that service and information on to different territories across the United States. And of course, we are very proud that we've now become a minority business enterprise, and as well certainly a women business enterprise as well, and have these certifications as well as an organization. And we're very proud to have those now for IncentiFind. And so IncentiFind is designed, again, to bridge the gap between 25,000 projects that are deployed and then the $20 billion worth of incentives that could be garnered from doing these particular types of projects. And we bridge that gap using our 2-minute survey and the most comprehensive database of incentives that are available. So that's how we basically are a value add to getting these projects done, is by connecting up these projects with these certainly more in lucrative incentives that are out there to be able to help pay for those particular projects. And again, so the different types of incentives that we help to give you information on relates to tax incentives, different types of grants, fee waivers, rebates, and other bill credits, in which case can go to helping a whole host of different types of projects, as I mentioned. So in new construction area, we can be helpful on certain brownfield development type opportunities, opportunity zones, and as well as a new market tax credit opportunities for building new buildings so they're the most sustainable right from the very start of their time of operation. And then to existing buildings, we're very helpful in helping to deploy projects on historic reuse opportunities, beautification, and as well as for helping to deploy PACE finance projects in this case, which is the type of financing mechanism that allows you to go and do energy saving improvements or other types of improvements using basically this financing for residential and commercial buildings across the United States. Okay, so that's talking just a little bit about IncentiFind, and now we'll move on to talking about what actually we're going to be discussing in today's webinar, which is going to discuss what the whole concept of resilience is and why lenders should be then caring about resilience, resiliency improvement types that can be done for homes, and then how we would incorporate IncentiFind's products into your residential loan sales cycle that we would be working with you on. All right, so yeah, what is then this whole notion of resilience? So when we put it very simply, it's really the ability for a system, whether that's a group of people, a certain locality where you might live and reside, and then as well as an ecosystem, to deal with change and continue to develop. So it's really, I feel like it's one of these terms that can be a very interchangeable with adaptation, which is really then that evolution of some group or system that's going to be better able to live in its own particular habitat. So I feel like there's that sort of common thread that's between those two different types of terms in this case, and I think it just helps to better explain it and understand it of really what I think it is really sort of applicable to. And so resilience, like sustainability, this is a complex topic, we acknowledge, but more attention is now being given to resilience as certainly climate change impacts continue to worsen nowadays. Because look, we recognize that even as everything that we're doing on the mitigation front, so that is things like on these energy saving projects, as well as renewable energy projects, yes, we're continuing reducing the amount of carbon emissions that would result in this case from doing these particular projects. But the problem is that carbon is a type of element that will take a long time to degrade in our atmosphere. And then we're going to continue to experience the impacts of climate change as a result, because it takes a very long time for carbon to dissipate. So even with our best intentions and all the efforts we're doing nowadays, it's still not going to necessarily get rid of what impacts we're going to see from climate change, because of the very idea that I just went over with regard to how carbon emissions take a long time to degrade in our atmosphere. And so why then is resiliency then this important? Well, just look at these three different examples of where we have seen climate change be a problem across all different sections of the country. Let's start with wildfires, which you've seen predominantly in the western portion of the United States. And we know that wildfires are caused by changing climate patterns, because we can go with long periods of drought that can cause then vegetation to burn very easily, destroying then property, and as well as then harming then natural resources that could be useful in helping to mitigate climate change. Because with periods of time where you're not going to have any rain or any kind of other types of assistance and help in this case to help reduce the threats of wildfires, that's just going to continue to, I think, become a bigger problem. And we've seen that wildfires have grown in terms of the area where it gets impacted, and as well as to the length of time that wildfire seasons now tend to progress. We've now been seeing that wildfire seasons actually now been lengthening, maybe what used to be maybe just a few months out of the year, now it's becoming for a good portion of the year now. What we've seen in California, Oregon, and other states across the western section of the United States. So we definitely know that this is one of those bigger problems in this case, and why resiliency is certainly is important to be thinking about. Same goes with rising sea levels. We know that the polar ice caps continue to melt at a precipitous rate, and because of that, sea levels then are going to continue to rise over time. And then that's going to cause communities to flood more readily, and that's going to harm these coastal communities that have been there for many, many years. And so we recognize that this is going to impact, obviously, those natural communities that have been built, and that we know now that we're going to have to do things to get them to adapt easier, so that then they could maybe remain there for many more years to come as this issue on rising sea levels would continue. And certainly, lastly, is that we've seen stronger storms as a result of climate change, and then why we then certainly need to be doing things to consider resiliency, because these stronger storms, whether it be hurricanes, thunderstorms, or other flash floods, can really cause a great deal of damage to property, and as well as a lot of disruption to the local economy. We have seen examples where this can take out whole communities, in which case then it could leave communities reeling for months on end, and taking them a long time to recover before they can get back on track with basically operating to the way that they were before. And so it's clear that we have to be thinking about how do we build our homes and our buildings in a better way that they can withstand the strength of the storms that we're now been seeing in the last few years. And so it's definitely something we have to be thinking about on how do we adapt these properties then to be better functioning against any of these particular types of problems of wildfires, rising sea levels, and ultimately these stronger storms. And so as a result of all that, why should lenders then care about resiliency? Well, as we've noticed, and as we've been touching on in our previous webinars, climate change's impact is worsening, and as it's basically causing natural disasters to be worse events in this case that could affect the safety and soundness of the assets that in which your institution would hold a mortgage upon. Because the bottom line is that if you lose a home to a wildfire, a major flood, or some kind of other major storm, like a hurricane, the bottom line is that now you don't have that asset anymore. It's going to be completely destroyed, and that now there's no value left now to that property that you were once holding that mortgage on. And so you're going to lose that, and now you're going to lose, obviously, all that value, in which case you were dependent on to know that basically you were holding that mortgage on that property. So that is something obviously of a major concern, and something that I think would affect any lending institution across the country. And then certainly, I think why lenders should care is because we know that with these types of storms and with these properties being in more vulnerable areas, it's likely insurance costs are going to go up for that homeowner, because if it's going to cost more to insure that home, it's only going to basically just increase again what is going to be needed to protect that asset in being more vulnerable areas to those natural disasters. And so with higher insurance costs to the homeowner, that's going to lead to less dispensable income that now they're going to be able to pay towards things like their mortgage, paying towards things like their energy and their other kind of costs that they had to operate their home. So the bottom line is that this is only just going to squeeze a family's budget even more, and just make it all the more difficult for them to afford all of the costs that they would actually need in this case to operate their home. And of course, lastly among this is that you would become a subject matter expert on resiliency, because I think with the more that you learn about resiliency, you're going to end up helping more and more homeowners who are going to come into you for this kind of lending, so that they can make their homes more adaptable and more certainly strengthened from any of these potential natural disasters that are just going to continue to worsen over time, and that you are going to continue to have to experience and deal with as a mortgage lender as well. So, and this is actually another area where you can increase your business opportunities and do lending on these other kinds of projects. All right, so now that I've touched on why resiliency itself is important and why it should matter to you as a lender, let's now go into talking a little bit more about the kinds of improvements that a resiliency project could look like. So some examples of this could be things like floodproofing, raising a home, doing windproofing, doing some fireproofing, seismic retrofits in earthquake and other seismic prone areas. And then as well as too, just trying to see how basically energy efficiency, water conservation, and solar type improvements that we've addressed in previous webinars, how can this all come together to help address resiliency as well? We can actually touch on how this can actually be an impact on that area. All right, so let's start off with this whole subject of floodproofing, because I think this is something that can be seen all throughout the entire United States, right? You don't have to necessarily be in a coastal community to really experience the problems with flooding. You can also experience it in the central part of the country, where you're near rivers that could overflow, or other streams and other tertiary type waterways. That could always be a problem, when you have these flash flood type events that lead to the rising of the water levels to beyond the capacity of what they can handle, and then floods into communities all across the United States. And just to give you a sense about how bad flooding has been for properties in recent time, in 2019, nearly $4 billion in property damage was attributed to flooding incidents that occurred across the United States. And so while most properties can actually be salvaged, there's others that really cannot. And that then leads to the natural displacement of residents away from these more flood-prone areas, because either they could be reoccurring events that just, again, there's nothing much more maybe that property owner could do to protect their property, and it just leads them, in this case, then having to abandon that property and go elsewhere. And then floodproofing can help reduce or eliminate the damage caused by those flooding events. And some examples of some floodproofing improvements that could be done could include things like installing flood walls that can withstand, in this case, the water pressure that would come in from a major flood event. Same would go with flood doors that can also withstand that increased pressure. floodwater pumps that can maybe get water out of your property in a quick fashion. And as well as putting a waterproofing compounding on the home's foundation, which again could also help prevent water from coming into those areas in this case, so that again, the water does not naturally seep into maybe underground areas like a basement or crawl space or any other those kind of more vulnerable areas. All right, so the next area that can actually be used as a kind of resiliency type improvement is raising a home. So if a home is really susceptible to and it continues to endure these repeated, sort of damaging events like flooding and other types of natural disasters that can cause these major flooding incidents, then raising the home is another method that's been seen to be used to avoid these repeated damaging events in the future. And typically we've seen in coastal communities, these homes can be raised to be above the flood code in that area, which is usually dictated by FEMA. Which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And they will put out from time to time updated mapping, which will show what type of flood zone that a particular property might be sitting within. And then therefore, what is then the proper height and level that these properties should be put at so that they're being then above the natural flooding area that they might see for that particular community. And so homes can be placed on things like stilts, or raised and placed on a taller foundation, in which case then the area underneath then would not be conditioned space, but maybe just be used as storage going forward. And in which case then the livable and conditioned spaces then would be high enough and far off the ground that then it could actually withstand the impacts of flooding. So that again, then those conditioned spaces where you would live would not be impacted during these flood events. All right, and then so in terms of windproofing, there's two different types of major natural disasters that we probably would focus on for doing these kind of improvements. That among them is certainly hurricanes and as well as our tornadoes. And we know that hurricanes have been getting all the more stronger over these last few years, where we're seeing as a more of a common occurrence each and every hurricane season, more of these category 4 and 5 type hurricanes, which are known as major hurricanes. And these have been impacting coastal communities, especially in the Atlantic. So that's in the Gulf of Mexico, and as well as, of course, along the eastern seaboard. We've been seeing a lot of these hurricanes that have been causing major damage, maybe irreparable harm to those communities, and that can produce, winds that are really just beyond any comprehension. Where we're seeing 150 to maybe 175 mile per hour winds at any given times. And then tornadoes, well, that just goes, without saying, tornadoes could be a completely disastrous and just completely impactful event that will completely destroy a community that for wherever that tornado goes in terms of its path. And so we know that the Fuji scale that will then be able to say, okay, what are the impacts of the type of tornadoes you can see, which used to go from 0 to 5 in this case. These are major tornadoes that now can really do some destructive impact to those properties. And that you're trying to see now, what can you do to protect yourself in the midst of those kind of emergencies? All right, so here are some examples. So as we know, hurricanes, as I said, just mentioned, are certainly devastating more of the Atlantic coast as well as certainly the Gulf Coast. And in 2020 alone, $95 billion in total damage was experienced during this past hurricane season, which was a new record. And we're seeing that number continues to climb each and every year as we see more and more of these hurricanes and continuing to see the destruction and the damage that they do. So hurricane proofing can include things like installing a metal roof so that the roof can't come off as easily, fiberglass doors, impact windows in case there is flying debris, that it would then not crash into your windows and can actually protect against those kind of flying objects, or as well as a metal garage door. All those kinds of improvements can really help maybe strengthen and harden the home against those any kind of damaging winds and any kind of objects that could come toward it. For tornadoes, we've again been seeing how much more devastating and catastrophic events that we've been seeing in the South especially, and as well as in the Midwestern states, we've seen these examples. And so, with tornadoes, you can basically build a safe room inside the home, which can really be reinforced and making sure that you're safe. A cabling system, which can actually hold down much of the structure in this case and have it where it's really secured to the ground in this case, so that maybe the home can't come up in the midst of a major tornado coming through. And as well as hollow steel reinforced doors are actually also known to be impactful and helpful in terms of basically going and doing this in this case. So it can actually really be more useful in terms of helping to reduce the impacts that really maybe could occur with a tornado that could come through an area. All right, so in terms of fireproofing, as I mentioned already, that we know that wildfires have been something that's been commonplace on the West Coast and the Pacific Coast states more specifically. And as I mentioned, there'll certainly be lengthening over time in terms of when the fire season occurs, and that they're almost nearly these year-round events nowadays. And with the wildfires that we saw in 2020 alone, these wildfires were estimated to cost about $130 to $150 billion in property damage in and around the areas where they were seen this past year. So again, major devastation to these communities. I think all you had to do is remember what happened in Paradise, California, where it took a community completely off the map because it destroyed all of those potential community structures in this case, and the homes that were there. So that's just one sense of, again, of the kind of devastation you could see. And so fireproofing could be really the use of really kind of more fireproof building materials in this case. So really would protect maybe when a fire comes around. So that can be like fireproof roof shingles. Double pane windows are known to help withstand the extreme heat and the fires that would come through. And as well as exterior walls that are made out of concrete, because again, concrete can help resist those flames as they are coming closer and closer to the home, and at least can maybe help to alleviate maybe some of the opportunity of damage that might occur with those major wildfire events. And then, okay, so then sticking mainly to the West Coast, because we've certainly seen seismic events, occur out there. So with earthquake retrofits, we know that this is something that, it can be important really for those, seismic active communities, especially in California, and as well as in around other certain areas where there's, seismic activity where tectonic plates are meeting in this case in certain parts of the United States. And we know this can be a really, frightening and devastating, damaging experience in this case. In which case, for the average homeowner, the damage in this case can range in $5,000 to $10,000 worth of a damage to a home that would have to be repaired afterwards. And so there are certainly ways that a home could be retrofitted to help prevent maybe serious damage in the midst of an earthquake, which can include bracing what are the typical cripple walls. So really maybe those more vulnerable walls of a home that might be able to collapse more easily, in which case then that can be prevented by bracing them with plywood beams. As you can see in the picture, actually right to the right of where I'm talking at this point, you see an example of them bracing those kinds of walls. Stabilize the moisture around the foundations, because again, that will help prevent really further decay of any kind of foundation walls that would be around the home that could also lead to, again, maybe that concern of those walls crippling in the midst of a seismic event. And as well as, again, doing any reinforcement of masonry walls, which actually I'd say probably this picture actually is doing is actually reinforcing these brick walls in this case, which can actually really be helpful, again, and also helping to prevent further damage to a home structure so that, again, it could be better prepared against an earthquake to occur in their community. All right, so now let me just give you a sense of this type of incentives that could be out there for the different types of improvements that I just walked you through. So for example, in around California, they actually can, or actually just in and around basically some other parts actually in around different communities in the country, in this case actually around the South, they can give wind mitigation loans out in those states to the tune of up to $50,000 for helping states like in Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, or Alabama. There's also, too, a good program that's offered in Texas, known as the Safe Room Rebate Program, that also can help defray the cost of installing safe rooms that I touched on as being a good way to prevent maybe potential loss of life during a tornado event. Then going over to flood proofing, so one city in Illinois offers an up to $2,500 rebate on all residential flood control type projects that you can avail themselves to. Then in terms of fireproofing, there's what's known as a wood smoke reduction program that can help provide rebates up to $5,000 to homeowners to replace these uncertified wood stoves that could also pose as a fire risk that can lead to a fire that could occur in a community. And then in terms of seismic retrofitting, certainly PACE financing can be a way to help with paying for those improvements, in which case there's been an example of that done in California, where seismic improvements were included as part of PACE financing. And then as maybe an example, in El Cerrito, California, there was a maximum rebate for seismic upgrades of up to 1/3 of the tax paid for a transfer of real estate property at the point of maybe when you would do those improvements. They can get that little bit of a rebate off of basically then paying, for what tax that they would have to have paid for buying basically a property. All right. And so now let's touch a little bit on the types of upgrades that really can help increase resilience across the different 3 categories of sustainability that we touched on in our previous webinars that we did in this series. So for energy efficiency, we say just generally, any kind of those energy saving improvements can help obviously with reducing the real impacts and threats in this case that climate change can pose in terms of the natural disasters that we've said can occur. So reducing your electricity consumption with LED lighting, putting in more efficient heating and cooling equipment, and as well as insulation, all that goes a long way to help reduce how much energy you use, and that therefore can reduce the amount of carbon emissions that will then make the effects of climate change all the more worse. So you'll be helping to prevent that. For water conservation, doing things like rainwater harvesting systems and installing green roofs could also go a way to help make better use of water in this case and help to conserve how much then water that you're consuming, and doing it through more natural means like this, so that again, you can actually help to conserve on how much water you're using if you're in areas where maybe water is is basically in less supply. And I'm thinking about that again in the Pacific states, where they're then more prone to wildfires and that they can't necessarily get access then to municipal water and having to conserve and cut back on that. Then lastly, with solar and storage, yeah, anything that you see with trying to install renewable energy improvements, and then also doing that aligned with battery storage, all this together then can be very useful because now you're helping to now get off of the grid that might still be partly be made, the electricity being made that's going across the grid is through fossil fuel sources. And now you're going to all renewable technologies and getting your energy that way. That obviously helps to eliminate your carbon footprint through that means. And then battery storage helps to then make you more resilient, because now you can actually also guard yourself against potential grid failure, and as well as trying to do things to help reduce the peak demand on the grid in this case, so that it doesn't, it actually would not cause any kind of brownouts or any kind of other blackouts. So then how does energy efficiency again help resilience? So I think I actually was just beginning to touch on this a bit more, because we know that, with homes that still maybe will use fossil fuel types of energy sources, like their electricity, that might be partly done through electricity, through fossil fuels and natural sources, and as well as then like natural gas and fuel oil. We know that you're going to keep using that potentially in most homes. And so the more you can do to increase the efficiency of the home, so those energy sources are used less, that can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which then helps to reduce then the impacts then that are caused by climate change. And then reducing that greenhouse gas emissions then over time could help to then reduce the severity of these stronger storms, wildfires, floods, and other types of natural disasters that could all cause damage to a home over time. So, and of course, as I mentioned, with water conservation, this also can help resilience, because at any major time, maybe through a catastrophic event, or if you might be told to cut back on your utility water usage, it can be cut off at any point, and then that leads you to having less or even no access then to water supplies to your home. And that's why doing these water conservation type improvements, like I mentioned, can help collect that natural water and provide it to you at a point, maybe when you can't get access to your water utility provided water to your home. So again, that water supply can always be rolling to you when you are having that limited or even non-existent situation, as I was just laying out. And then, of course, finally, as I just mentioned, how solar and storage helps on resiliency, again, because we know that this helps to reduce basically greenhouse gas emissions. and eliminating the use of electricity that is still largely being created from fossil fuel sources. That can be done through installing things like rooftop solar, solar thermal, and other types of technologies that can help eliminate that use of the electricity still being really created by fossil fuel sources. And as I mentioned, battery storage, again, very useful in helping you to supply power during a utility grid failure, and as well as then reducing demand on utility grids during those peak times that can prevent things like brownouts and blackouts in the entire community. And so, just as a way to cap on what kind of other incentives that are out there for these types of projects that we've touched on in the other webinars. So that can include things like in New York's territory, Con Edison provides a sealed weatherproofing upgrades program that can help actually with covering the cost of foundation sealing and other insulation in this case to help reduce energy consumption and through energy efficiency. For water conservation, you might see in this case, there's something known as the Florida Friendly Landscape rebate that can provide up to 100% of the cost and up to $200 to put in landscaping and plants in this case that would not require as much water usage in this case to water those plants to keep them alive and surviving. And then lastly, certainly on storage and solar, there's all different kinds of ways to fund these improvements, and namely among them, if you have PACE financing enabled in your jurisdiction, a renewable energy tax credits, and other types of programs that, as you see here, can be useful for helping to deploy these types of improvements. And then let's now go to the example of Los Angeles more specifically and look at the types of improvements that are out there, because then we'll touch on a case study example of maybe how all these incentives could come together for a real holistic project. So for seismic retrofits, as I mentioned, PACE financing was used in California for a seismic retrofit project. And as well as then with energy efficiency, there's a consumer rebate program for the installation of things like cool roofs, HVAC replacement, windows, and even a whole house fan that can help improve with the ventilation of a home and help to basically, get, bad air out and basically make sure you're getting proper air circulation throughout the home. And then lastly, then these areas of water conservation and as well as solar and storage. So another example could be, for example, with putting in rain barrel and cisterns in this case to collect natural rainwater. SoCal, which is, again, the water utility that's out there, can help provide rebates for those kinds of improvements for homes. And then for solar and storage, as I mentioned, there's the renewable energy tax credit, and as well as then these other even kinds of programs that can help provide solar thermal for even like a low income, homeowners in this case, with that rebate up to $5,397. All right, so if we put this all together, right? So touching on all the different sustainability topics we've gone through, and now even touching on resilience. So let's, again, use this example of a Los Angeles home that's just less than 5,000 square feet in size, and it's an existing home that's 40 years old or so. So they want to do things like putting in a more energy efficient roof. They want to do some seismic bracing in this case to help prevent an earthquake from destroying their home, putting in more energy efficient insulation, as well as the new HVAC and air conditioning unit. The total project could cost them nearly $51,000. But the incentives that they can get through this project could actually probably get about a fifth of the total cost covered by these incentive programs. And so $50,800 in project cost, and you take out the incentives that they can get, that leaves them having to finance about a $40,000 project, which that's a pretty decent project in this case for you as a residential lender that you can then be able to cover. And in which case then, as I mentioned, the costs in this case and what's going to be saved, the percentage is probably about, again, 20% of those total costs being covered alone by the incentives that they can get throughout Los Angeles. So again, a pretty good deal for that homeowner to be able then to do this entire project and then have the financed amount being covered by a lender to help them get the rest of this project implemented. All right, so I've gone through all the different types of resiliency improvements that you can do for a home. And then now I'm going to touch on how IncentiFind can come into the picture to help you with selling that loan of doing these different types of energy saving, water saving, and as well as renewable energy and resilience type projects. So again, put most simply, the quick summary, is a great way to pique really the interest of the property owner who's considering incorporating, resilience and other types of improvements into their project, in which case then again, can be done with this quick summary product. In which case this is an affordable tool that just is as its namesake suggests, it quickly summarizes how many incentives are available in the borrower's territory that can be able to make then resiliency improvements to their own home. So again, just it wets their whistle a little bit and gets them exposed to knowing what's out there. And that then you can maybe lure them in to then want to learn more about those incentive programs that they actually could avail themselves to. And you having the quick summary at your disposal will then differentiate yourselves from the competition. Because now with you having this is going to help you as a lender to grow your home equity, refinancing, new construction, and renovation portfolios. Because again, you're going to have now this value add by having these tools at your disposal that you can incorporate into your loan cycle so that basically you can then be able to sell on doing these projects and financing them for the homeowner that you're working with. And again, this is, again, valuable data that you're bringing to them. And then certainly, again, it increases the odds really that you'll be able to finance these projects and getting it done for the homeowner. And then again, this is just an example of what a quick summary would look like. And you just get a sense again about how many different types of incentive programs are in a particular territory for these different types of projects that could be done. And then you can even begin to list some specific examples of an incentive in each of those categories. And so that, again, it just gives the property owner the exposure to knowing what kinds of other free money and incentives that are out there that they can get access to help with defraying the cost of a particular project. All right, so that just gave you a sense about what the quick summary is. So now let's talk about how we can insert that into your sales cycle. So, we find that probably finding out a bit about a particular project is really probably good in doing it at the start of the application phase, right? So that's when a property owner comes into you. They're going to tell you a little bit about what the project is going to be that they're trying to get financing for. And then you would then be able to find that out right at the very beginning. And that intake process should allow you as a lender to find out, again, that type of project. And so that then maybe there are ways that then you can also then see how resiliency could then be incorporated into the project if maybe they're not thinking about it, and knowing that maybe their property is in a vulnerable area. So let's then think about that in this case, right? So I see, again, 3 different types of major projects that could begin to think about incorporating resilience into that project. So let's go with the standard home renovation project that they want to go and just do improvements, to improve the aesthetics of that property, and maybe even make better use of their home footprint in this case, so they can use that space much better. So for example, they could be able to do things like maybe flood proofing of the home, wind proofing of the home, fire proofing of that home as well, and maybe installing solar and battery storage. Because maybe some of these improvements wouldn't be too obvious because maybe there's, again, just standard types improvements, and that it wouldn't affect the aesthetics so much from the outside of the home, but it's going to provide this additional support and protection to the home against these other kinds of natural disasters that could affect the asset going forward. If they did a gut rehabilitation project, which then completely guts the entire homes and then just looking to maybe improve aesthetics and other systems of the home, well, we can maybe add other types of things besides the flood, wind, and fireproofing that I just touched on, as well as the solar and battery storage. Now you can think about maybe doing it correctly and do these earthquake retrofit improvements as well to help brace vulnerable walls inside the home that can then stand to get that added support and help just in case they're in an area where seismic activity is prevalent. So that's maybe something else to think about and add into a project besides those other improvements. And then certainly lastly, with a new construction project where it's a ground up, newly constructed home that didn't exist before on the land, well, there's endless possibilities. There's all different kinds of things they can do. You could also think about, this is a time to maybe build the home to be above flood code, all right? So that basically it already is a raised home and that can be above the ground. And then you're making sure that you're bracing it with the proper flood, wind, and fire type improvements that can really help protect that home during those other natural events that might occur. And then as well as certainly solar and battery storage would make much sense. And then really just doing all kinds of energy efficiency and water efficiency type improvements. All that together could really make for a very resilient and sustainable home that you could help to finance in this case for that particular homeowner. And as I've been mentioning in the previous webinars, and I'm going to really close with saying here in this case is, again, if you really don't see that they're thinking about those particular opportunities, don't assume that they're not looking for it. So find and use this as an opportunity to educate them and maybe let them know and show them how this can be something important to add to the project, whether it is these other sustainability type improvements as well as resiliency type improvements that we just touched on. And then if you really bring it to their attention and you pique their interest, they may then consider pursuing doing those improvements, and you can increase the size of the loan of the project that you're looking to finance with them than what they originally came in for. So that now that they're really also too, not leaving anything on the table, and that they're really coming away with a really holistic project that's going to help protect the asset for many years to come, and that you know that now the loan that you're going to put to that property is also that safety and soundness of that product is going to be protected. All right, and that is the conclusion of this webinar. And again, we want to thank you for listening in on this webinar today on the subject of resilience. And we really encourage you to go to our IncentiFind YouTube page, where you can find the other 3 webinars that we have provided to you on the topics of energy efficiency, water conservation, as well as renewable energy systems like solar. So that again, you can become a subject matter expert on all these various topics around sustainability and resiliency. And so, and of course, if you have any questions or anything about how, again, IncentiFind can be helpful to you, to making you a subject matter expert and incorporating IncentiFind's products into your loan sales cycle, definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be very happy to work with you on these efforts and partnerships going forward. So thank you very much, and have yourself a great day.